Hey now, you're an all-star. Get your game on. Go play. Hey now, you're a rock star. Get your show on. Get paid. All that glitters is gold. Only shooting stars break the mold. I don't know if you guys knew that. What's up, everybody? Still chugging away here with this summer course. Hope you're getting something out of it, whatever it is. Hope something positive out of all this. Something more than just a grade, I hope. Um, so today I'm going to cover Master of None and Brooklyn Nine-Nine in this video. Thank you for your comments. Keep them coming. I appreciate them greatly. So we're still talking about race and representation on TV, right? We had a more boilerplate discussion in the last video, last two shows. Boondocks and All in the Family sort of take this like black white approach. Like that's what gets all the hype in our country for sure, right? When you bring up the topic of race, most people's minds immediately go to black and white. But there's a whole some of you who are neither black nor white might be like, yeah, it's about time. Like there are more races, there are more there's more people out there than just those two. And our concerns are as valid and uh, crucial as anybody else's. Um, so I think you have those two shows versus these two. These two are way more just sort of like, I don't want to say progressive, but just looking at the issue from a different perspective. Um, so Master of None, obviously from a brown perspective, right? Um, Aziz Ansari, um, and it's a great show. Every episode deals with the different nuances of being this first generation um, Indian American, and his parents are still are from India. So there's this sort of gap between their understanding of the world, um, and then there's a gap between the world's understanding and Aziz's or Dev's. That's his name in the show. Um, so a lot of this for me, and then Brooklyn Nine-Nine, as many of you pointed out, is just like even more diverse, right? Um, Diverse on gender lines, diverse on racial lines, diverse on age lines, diverse on sexuality lines. Um, but what I haven't really talked about it much yet. I was kind of saving it for Master of None because if Master of None really is when I started to notice this idea about television and how it works. As I mentioned before about TV can either normalize or radicalize behaviors. It can tell you what you want to hear and convince you to double down on your bullshit because, look, it's on TV. Or it can snap you out of your bullshit. And you can see it on TV, maybe from a different perspective, and be like, oh, wait, that's me, and I suck. Maybe I should radicalize and change the way I think, feel, what I value, whatever it is. Similar thing happens in TV and with race, especially, and that is exploitation versus exploration, right? Remember those two words because they go hand in hand in this situation. In this case, so for most shows exploit minorities, They exploit difference for humor's sake, for money's sake, to make money. And in doing so, they sort of trivialize in this case, the brown experience or the black experience or the gay experience or whatever it is. Um, and that's a disservice. Like that's been normalized over years and years and years, right? The token character, the token black character, the token gay character, the token female character. They're all there to serve a very specific function, and it's mostly exploitative, right? The example I use and it is runs it's perfectly paired with Master of None is Big Bang Theory. Okay, I don't know how many of you guys watch it or have watched it or know what it is or if you're a fan of it, whatever. But if you're any of those, you can't deny what the show does with Raj, the Indian character. He's simply there to be a stereotype. He's there to give them access to just bad Indian jokes, right? He does the accent, and he he does the accent. He just is a Indian stereotype for punchlines, right? The only time you don't really learn anything about him or his culture, where he comes from, and what he's all about. You just know he's the funny Indian guy, right? And he says things funny, and he eats weird food, and like whatever it is, it's seemingly innocent, but is it really? I think it's extremely disingenuous, and it has roots through most of you know most of TV's history. Um, so not I can't remember when Master of None came out, but it is decidedly exploratory, right? It doesn't reduce Dev Aziz's character to a stereotype. He's aware of the stereotypes. He fights them at every turn. He's still trying to make his way in the world around them or through them, right? He's you learn I learned more about what it means to uh, to be someone like Aziz from watching the show than anywhere else than I could have in a lecture or something like that. It's almost a first-hand telling of, hey, this is what it's like. It's the good, the bad, the ugly. Um, and they're not sugarcoating it, and they're not saying, you know, we're the best race or whatever. It's just it's an exploration. And if your end game is to explore the race or whatever it is and teach other people about it, then you get a pass from me. Like if that's the intent, sometimes the the way you go about it doesn't work or it doesn't land, but if your intent is to explore, then it's I think it's infinitely more interesting, number one, and you know, I think it's commendable. If it's to exploit and just be like, we need an Indian character. Can you do the voice? Like that's um, the whole meta, especially the episode that I had you guys watch. Right? It's so meta because here they are talking about a show won't work. You can't have two, right? It'll be an Indian show, and here's Master of None with two. You're literally watching the show that they're saying can't exist, right? And the show was very was very uh, very successful. Like Adama mentioned that kind of the meta nature not just the show, but this episode specifically, kind of talking about the the characters and the situations. So I also think this is a case of somebody like Aziz Ansari taking his fame and doing something with it. Like he could have made a show that exploited his people and his community. And it probably would have been funny and probably would have made him a ton of money, but why stop there? Like, why? When you can do the same thing and have it be meaningful. Like, that's my point about TV and art and things like that. Like, don't just do it to make a buck. Um, have some self-respect. You know, he's trying. I think he's trying to make a difference. He's trying to inform people. Um, so you have um, a sort of this different perspective about race, right? It's not just a black white thing. It's this Asian. It's Asian identity at the same time. But there's also his friend group, which is um, a white guy, a black gay woman, and an Asian guy, right? So, and they're not token characters. Like that's I think most of us can tell when there's just a token character that's there because someone said we have to have this character. It's not really part of the story. That's that's how people get communities get easily exploited. Tokenism does that to um, to communities, just like it's patronizing almost. And I don't think you get that from Master of None. So there is this intersectionality that's happening, um, not just with this show, but with Brooklyn Nine-Nine as well. What does it say? Oh, what does it do differently than other sitcoms? Um, I think I've just mentioned that. It doesn't just focus on black and white. Um, the Asian struggle is way way down the line. The whole model minority thing, like people just don't assume that it's an issue when it 100% is. Um, we've seen it a little bit these last 5 years or so with the spikes in anti-Asian hate crimes and things like that. Um, so I think again, like this stuff needs to be sort of put out there. Um, it it also gives value to the struggle of those other communities, right? Um, I mentioned this before, but like I don't know what it's like to have to sort of give up part of myself every day just to survive, hide parts of myself, right? Not be truly who I am. And I think every minority goes through that. Like, okay, where am I going? I have to dress. Do I have to dress differently to be accepted or seen as equal? Do I have to talk differently? Do I have to, deny parts of my identity or my heritage or whatever? Like, that sucks, dude. Like, that's such a pain in the ass. And it can be demoralizing and it can be depressing and it can be frustrating. So I think there's a lot of shows now that are acknowledging that and I think trying to remedy it um, in some way. Um, so there's if you guys know what the Bechdel test is, it was a feminist thing. This woman like devised this little formula to see if movies were, or any media, movies or TV or whatever, narratives basically were sort of talking about women equally. So you had to have and you have to have a certain number of scenes where a woman is talking to another woman or more than one woman about something other than men. And like, if you have enough of those scenes, you pass the Bechdel test, basically. For me, this is the Bechdel test for race, right? I'm white, right? There's no shortage of white guys talking to white guys about white things. Like that's most of television for the last 100 years, whatever it is, right? Um, so this is sort of, I think, a goal of the show is to like show this other side of culture, um, of the world, and try to, you know, try to have not everything so whitewashed and seen through this white lens. Um, I think it does a good job of doing that. It Race is incidental. I think that's something that this show brings up. Like the way that Dev approaches the whole thing. Like he's like, "Why do you need me to do the accent?" Like, he's just talking very frankly about it. But if you look at, Aziz's characters across, his career, well, he was Tom on Parks and Rec, but his brownness had nothing to do with it, right? You looked at him as just like, oh yeah, he works at the Parks Department. Like, you never thought that you had to think of him differently than any of the other characters, if that makes any sense. His race is incidental to his character in in this show, and in Parks and Rec, um, and in his stand-up. Kind of, he doesn't really go into, too many like stereotypical things. So this show for me it's about a minority experience. If you've seen the show Ramy by Ramy Youssef, is a very similar idea, and it's about him being a Muslim. And I learned more about Islam and the Muslim faith and like what it means to people and uh, to culture from that show than anywhere else. And it's funny and it's interesting and it's exploring the depths of what it means to be a human being. And like that will always be interesting, right? Um, when we give you surface characters, superficial, stereotypical characters, well, of course you're going to get shitty jokes and um, just shallow, shallow entertainment. But why not do more when when you can? It just doesn't make any sense. Um, what else am I got here? Gives depth to the conflict with every person of color, basically. And it doesn't. It's kind of like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. When I get to that show, it's kind of the same idea, right? We have to move beyond the whole, hey guys, racism is bad. Because, like, that's what old sitcoms would have done. They would have had one episode out of the season of 26 or whatever, and it would have been some minority character was discriminated against, and like at the end it gets all solved, and it's like, hey guys, don't be racist. Yeah, like it doesn't. It's not about that anymore, right? There's no, hey guys, racism's bad, right? You have to move. We have to move past that, right? It's that alone is sort of condescending, I think, to an audience. Um, and I don't think the show wants your sympathy or your pity. Um, it wants to get everyone to a better understanding of the plight of minority communities. Like that is really what I think Master of None is about. If I had to put it in one sentence, like a thesis or mission statement, like it's probably on the pilot script. It was like get everyone to a better understanding of the plight of minority communities. Um, so there's all that going on with that show. I think Aziz navigates it really well. Um, there's also no a racist thing happened and here's how to fix it moment, right? The whole thing with casting and the whole thing with casting and then not picking up the show, but not picking up the show and changing the thing. Like, it's all a process. Like, I don't know if at the end of that episode we're any different, but we've gone through this process of realizing how shitty a lot of this is for not white people. Um, it's about dealing with the prejudice and the stereotypes and the racism and the all the negative sort of aspects of it. And Dev doesn't lose his mind. He's trying to figure it out sort of logically, um, right? So, and I mentioned this, and um, Adama did too, like the meta nature of the show, right? Master of None is literally the show that's trying to change the perception from the inside. Um, the way he said he wanted this, I can't remember what the show was, what the name of the fake show was that they were going for. So only a couple Master of None comments. Adama I mentioned. Um, the idea that Hollywood loves to make caricatures of different people, races, whatever, sexualities, right, and reduce them to their most superficial things. Um, this I think shows it happening and how sort of pulls back the curtain on how people deal with that. Um, and then I thought Jordan brought up a pretty good point about producers, directors, executives who are like, you know, they're trying to make the most money possible and having to it's almost like they have to be racist if all they care about is the bottom line. They have to give people what they want, and people don't want two brown people on a show. That's there is a logic to that, but to say that having two brown people on a show can't make money it's ridiculous. Like it just is. Um, it's like um, that you can't be funny and meaningful at the same time. Like a lot of people think that, but like South Park and The Simpsons have proven for literally like 30 plus years that that's not true. It's just patently false. They're two of the most lucrative franchises in the history of the world, and they're both extremely satirical and critical of the culture in which they are produced. So to say that, you know, a show with two brown characters can't make money is just it's kind of ridiculous, and it's disingenuous to say that, right? To fall back on the well, people don't want it. Like we don't really know what people want, despite what Jack Donaghy says. Um, so then we move to Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and you know it's a great use of diversity. I'll put it that way, right? We talked about tokenism just a minute ago. It doesn't have that feeling like, oh, here's the black character, here's the gay character, here's the female lead, and she's gonna be like this, right? A bunch of you mentioned how pretty much all the characters cut against their sort of traditional stereotype, right? Um, Holt isn't, he's not, you can't tell he's gay. Let's put it that way. He's not the gay that everybody loves on TV, right? Which is the over the top, flamboyant, just, whatever. He's not that. Jeffers, Terry is, he's this huge, jacked black guy, yet he's this sort of, not mama's boy, but, he's daddy's girl. I don't know what he is. You know what he is. He's kind of out of the line of fire. He's obsessed with the safety of his daughters. Like, he's alpha looking, but beta acting, I guess, which you just don't expect, right? And then Jake is very much this, and this is kind of a new trend in the last probably 10 or 15 years, just the beta male, right? Like Jim Halpert from The Office, beta male, just kind of just smart and snarky, and not like macho and muscular and overtly masculine. That's Jake, right? Jake has this alpha beta ness, if that makes any sense. More sensitive, more more clever, less brutish, and what's his name? What's his name? I haven't watched it in a while. Boyle. Boyle is this feminized version of a man, right? He's not masculine either, but he's super feminized. Like, his whole obsession with food and cooking and all that kind of stuff. He's kind of Jake's lackey. And then, you have, yeah, the same way Dev's race is incidental, or Aziz's race is incidental, Holt's sexuality is incidental. And one of you guys mentioned that idea. Let me see here my notes. Where is it? I guess maybe it was Adama. Everybody's going against the type, right? Everybody is doing something that you don't expect. If you're being lazy watching the show, you're not gonna get it, right? Because these characters don't reward lazy viewers who are just looking for the old stereotypes. Even for like Santiago, right? And Rosa, like their relationship is kind of conflicted a little bit, but Santiago is proving in episode 1 even that she is a peer of Jake's, right? They're in this competition and it's very close. Like, they're both good cops. There's a meritocracy about this whole thing. That is important. Like, she got her job because she's good at it. And she's not hyper masculinized, but she's somewhere in the middle, like where everybody should probably be. And then you have Rosa, who's again just good at her job. Like, there's none of that. There's no fighting for a man between the women on the cast. right? And Gina's out of her mind, right? But she's that like no, she's unapologetic. She's unequivocally Gina herself. She doesn't care. She doesn't give a fuck about what anybody says or what they think of her for the most part. Um, and that is not typical of a woman or a female character on a TV show. Exhibit A, Jenna from 30 Rock, right? So you have all these characters that you think you know, but you don't know, except two. And nobody mentioned them, but the only two that fit type are Scully and Hitchcock, right? And they're very representative of this whole idea of this show. The two old white guys are dinosaurs. Like, they're useless. They're sort of like, we've moved on from that, right? Those two guys, 20 years ago would have been the main characters. So now they're being made an example of, right? Only Scully and Hitchcock play to type and do exactly what you expect them to do, right? Um, but they're like Archie Bunker. They're made an example of. So they're representing this idea that, you know, old the old ways are gone, right? Um, so we need to move forward and embrace this difference and all these wonderful things that people bring to the table, regardless of what they look like or who they like to fuck or whatever. Um, yeah, a bunch of you mentioned the backdrop of the NYPD is important, right? Like it really is. Um, Using Holt as the captain of the precinct in the NYPD and talking about some of those kinds of things, I think makes it just sort of ups the ante on every issue that they discuss, right? Because they're all kind of the public perception of the NYPD or law enforcement in general is not like this. So there's another way that they cut against it. And Jordan mentioned, the NYPD versus Dunder Mifflin as these backdrops. Like it seems you can do a lot more of this kind of work with uh, a police precinct than the office of a paper company, right? There's more at stake. It feels like. So I think that's important, right? That they chose this way to tell this this story, and I think it maybe to a little lesser extent it explores, but it certainly doesn't exploit these characters and who they kind of represent, but it explores in many ways these marginalized groups that we've been talking about. Um, it's those when I said before, like Aziz's race is incidental in all of his characters. Holt's sexuality is incidental. Like all those markers that we use typically to define people that give a very shallow definition. Like, yeah, you're gonna make judgments on sight. But all you can see is the color of a person's skin, maybe what they're wearing, how they wear their hair, how they talk. That's not a person. Like that's very surface level knowledge of a person. So, and those things don't. Those are the least interesting things about you, like what you look like and your sexual whatever. Like who cares? But we in our culture have decided that those are the most important things, right? Um, and they're mostly things that we can't control, right? Um, who we, the color of our skin, who we like to have sex with. Like, it's difficult. Um, so there's race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality. Like, those are all incidental in this show, at least. Um, and they rarely come up. I think that's a positive thing. Um, yeah, it really. I mean, this is just a longer way of saying it's disrupting the stereotypes. And let's. I'll be clear. Let me be clear. Stereotypes aren't false. Stereotypes exist. You can't just make up a stereotype. Somewhere there's someone, or there's probably a lot of people who are the stereotype. Like, to say that these stereotypes don't exist, they 100% exist. It's just when you apply them, as a blanket sort of assessment of an entire group of people, that's when you get in trouble. So it gives some depth to the stereotypes. It's like being black isn't just these five things, right? Being white isn't these, being gay isn't these five things. It can be virtually anything, right? And I think that's something that the show at least tries to do, right? Um, uh, doesn't rely on limiting tropes. Um, the things that do have an impact on their relationships, the stories, the narratives, their jobs, our intellect, work ethic, instincts, all those things are raceless and genderless and sexless, if you think about it. Right? So if we start focusing on those things, like, we're all going to be in a better position, right? There's no, with the female characters, there's no uptight, like, infighting or passive aggressive infighting or gossiping or whatever it is. Um, it comes down to how well they do their job, how hard they work, the pride they take in it, um, all those kinds of things. And those things transcend our limitations of stereotypes, right? They transcend um, race, gender, and sexuality. So I think that's a biggie too. Um, but it also doesn't ignore or trivialize the journey or the experience. There's this quote here. It's from the show. I can't remember who said it. I haven't watched this episode in like a year or so, but it wasn't easy and we're not done. Someone in the show says that. Like, that's the point, right? There's a great line, just metaphor for the show and all this stuff that I'm trying to beat into your heads, right? It's not easy to just get people to think beyond stereotypes, and we're not done. So, like, this show, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, we're not done kind of trying to reshape the way people think about bisexuals, right? Rose is a bisexual. The way people think about Latinx people, Santiago, Rosa, gay people, Holt, black people, Holt, Terry, like, we're not done. It's a great balance of humor and issue, because I think some people get worried when TV, especially sitcoms, start to sort of cross the line and start to be about something. You can balance it. You have to balance it out. it avoids punchlines. It avoids like setup punchline, like getting old, getting cheesy. It's not patronizing, right? It doesn't stoop down to this lowest common denominator level. Jake's character does that a little bit, like he's goofy silliness. Um, it's not an agent of marginalization. Let's put it that way. Like Brooklyn Nine-Nine is trying to sort of steer away from that. It's also kind of like Master of None in that it's not self-congratulatory. Like it never pats itself on the back, right? Um, Jake, Jake is earnest about changing. When he finds out that he's fucked up, like in one of these situations, and he's sort of either prejudged somebody or whatever it is, he doesn't double down on it. He tries to figure out how to avoid doing that, like in the future. Um, he is often confronted with his own ignorance, and he doesn't, like I said, like double down on it. Yeah, I think this is from a different episode. But um, yeah, the my final point before I get to your comments and wrap it up. Um, the the whole point of the pilot is like Holt's there to fix the precinct, right? He's coming in to sort of overhaul it, get it running more efficiently, all that kind of stuff. And where does he start? Where does he start the process of overhauling this or fixing this precinct? He starts with the white guy, right? He starts with like that's who we kind of need to work on to just sort of maybe realize the breadth of this and sort of move in a um, more positive direction. Um, so I mentioned Adama's content about all the stereotypes, all the characters going against type. Like that's clearly not an accident. Um, Charlie used this idea. It's not a precinct; it's a neighborhood, or it's a neighborhood, not a precinct. Um, I liked that way of thinking about it. Um, the characters aren't defined by their stereotypes, and you kind of stumbled onto this thing similar to my exploitation versus exploration. Charlie said, incorporating but not undermining, right? That's kind of analogous to what I was talking about before. Um, Alyssa Alyssa reiterated that the whole police angle of it all, right? The way Holt kind of isn't a stereotypical cop, right? That we sort of think of. Um, and the at least Rosa, Gina, and Santiago aren't simply just props for men, right? They're not there to be the love. Now, Peralta does end up, Jake does end up with Santiago, but it's not like that. If you know what if you know what I mean. Um, like the way The Office in the first episode of The American Office, Jim and Pam are already. They're like, we gotta. These two have to be in love, and we have to force that down people's throats. Like they don't. They don't do that here, because women aren't props in these men's lives. Um, they're not stuck in their own identities, which is another good little turn of phrase for that. Emma, I mentioned how it's a meritocracy, right? Their abilities are what sort of jump out at you, that they're good at their job and how they got there, not necessarily their looks or their whatever. Um, and then, Tiffany sort of reiterated the same thing with the gender stereotypes, right? It's not just racial stereotypes, it's not just sexual stereotypes, it's also gender stereotypes that it's really trying to diffuse or dismantle or just sort of, break down in some sort of way. So, another video, another day, and I know you're not watching these. This is what's so insane about the whole process. I realize, I don't know, there's nothing I can do. I wish you would. If you've watched this far, you got here, just comment on it. Comment on this video, on this post, so I know that you got this far. What are you going to do?